I never imagined that my small daily act of kindness could become the thing that saved my life. Every single morning for the past 8 months, I would give Grace, a homeless elderly woman, a few dollars right outside my bookstore in downtown Seattle. One day she suddenly grabbed my wrist with a strength I didn't know she had and whispered, "Philip, don't go home tonight. Promise me you won't. Trust me." At the time, I thought she was just confused or having some kind of episode. But when I woke up the next morning and saw the news showing flames completely destroying my house in Queen Anne, I realized that my tiny act of kindness had been repaid with my very life. Before I tell you everything that happened next, if you're watching this story, please subscribe to the channel, like button, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Every morning at 8:30 sharp, I walked past Grace on my way to open Miller's Books on First Avenue. She never asked for money, never made eye contact, just sat there with her weathered hands folded neatly in her lap, quietly waiting like she had all the time in the world. 8 months. That's how long this routine had been going on since I first noticed her on the corner of First and Madison. Seattle in November has that raw, wet chill that gets into your bones. But something about Grace always made me slow down for a second. Maybe it was the way she never looked desperate like so many others on the street. She just existed there, patient as stone. The divorce had left me with the bookstore and a little 2-story house a few blocks up the hill on Highland Drive. Laura's affair had cost me the big house in Madison Park and half our savings. But at least I had my peace of mind back. Some mornings, dropping a few dollars into Grace's paper cup felt like the only real human connection I had all day. The first time I gave her money, she simply nodded and said, "Thank you, sir." No sob story, no explanation, just quiet dignity wrapped in a faded green coat that had seen better decades. This particular Tuesday morning felt different, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The air carried the usual mix of coffee from the cafe next door and the salty smell of Elliott Bay. But there was something else, a tension hanging over everything. "Morning, Grace," I said, leaning down to drop a 20 into her cup. The bookstore had done well the day before, sold 4 rare first editions to a collector from Bellevue, so I was feeling generous. That's when she did something she had never done before. Her fingers, surprisingly strong for someone her age, wrapped around my wrist like a vice. "Don't go home tonight." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but there was an urgency that made my blood freeze. "Promise me." "Philip," I tried to pull back, but her grip tightened. "Grace, what are you talking about?" Her pale blue eyes, usually focused somewhere in the distance, locked onto mine with startling intensity. "Promise me you won't go home tonight. Stay somewhere else. Anywhere else." "I don't understand," I stammered. "Promise me." The desperation in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from her. This was the same woman who had sat through pouring rain without flinching, who had never once complained about the cold. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "Okay. I promise." She released my wrist immediately, her hands returning to their usual folded position, as if nothing had happened. But her eyes stayed on mine for another heartbeat before she looked away. "Thank you," she said quietly. I stood there rubbing my wrist where her fingers had pressed, the morning commuters flowing around us, office workers clutching coffee cups, students with backpacks, the usual Tuesday rhythm of downtown Seattle coming to life. But everything felt wrong now. Grace had returned to her statue-like stillness. Yet I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing up and down the street as if watching for something dangerous. "Grace, what's going on?" I asked again. "Go to work." "Philip," she answered, using my name for the first time ever. I had told her my name months ago, but she had never repeated it back. "Just go to work," I backed away slowly, my keys jingling in my shaking hand as I tried to process what had just happened. The familiar routine of unlocking the door, flipping on the lights, starting the coffee maker felt completely foreign now, like I was acting out someone else's life. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't the rambling of a confused old woman. This was a warning delivered with absolute certainty. All day long, I couldn't shake what Grace had said. Her words followed me around the bookstore like a dark shadow, making it impossible to focus on anything else. "Excuse me, you gave me $7 back instead of 17, a woman in a navy coat snapped, holding up the crumpled bills. "That's the second time today. Sorry. I'm so sorry," I mumbled, fumbling through the register to find the right change. My hands were trembling slightly. When had that started? The afternoon dragged on forever. Every customer who walked through the door seemed to move in slow motion, their voices echoing strangely in my ears. Mrs. Peterson from down the hill wanted to know if I had any new mystery novels. The college kid looking for a textbook on American literature kept asking questions I couldn't quite process. Even simple transactions felt like trying to solve impossible equations. By 6 o'clock, I had completely given up pretending to work. I flipped the sign to closed and locked the door, then stood there in the growing darkness of my bookstore, surrounded by thousands of stories yet unable to make sense of my own. "Promise me you won't go home tonight." The rational part of my brain told me this was ridiculous. Grace was a homeless woman who probably had untreated mental health issues. Maybe she had confused me with someone else. Maybe she was having some kind of episode. But there was another part of me, deeper than logic, that remembered the look in her eyes, the way her fingers had pressed into my wrist, like she was trying to push her fear directly into my bloodstream. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Ellen Thompson's number. Ellen had lived next door to my little house on Highland Drive for the past 4 years. Ever since Laura and I bought the place, she was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything. When your lights were on too late, when your car stayed in the driveway, when newspapers piled up on the steps. "Hi, Ellen, it's Philip," I said when she answered. "Listen, I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days. Business trip up to Portland. Could you keep an eye on the house, of course? Honey, everything okay? You sound a little off." "Just work stress. Thanks. I really appreciate it." I hung up before she could ask more questions. Then I walked to the back room and pulled out the old sleeping bag I kept for emergencies. The couch in my office was narrow and lumpy, but it would do for one night. As I settled in, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but somewhere deep in my gut, something told me Grace wasn't just rambling. That night, lying on the old sofa in my bookstore, I had no idea how right she was. At 3:12 in the morning, my phone shattered the silence. I jerked awake, neck stiff from the awkward angle. The harsh ringtone cut through the darkness like a siren. "Who on earth was calling at this hour, Mr. Miller? This is Seattle Fire Department. Your house on Highland Drive. There's been an explosion." The words hit me like a physical blow. When I sat up so fast my head spun. "What did you say? A gas explosion?" "Sir, we need you to come to the scene immediately. Are you injured? We were told you might have been inside." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "No, I'm not there. I'm at my bookstore downtown." "Thank God. We'll need to speak with you when you arrive." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. I threw on yesterday's clothes, called a cab, and sat in the back seat watching Seattle's empty streets flash by like scenes from someone else's nightmare. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why his passenger looked like he had seen a ghost. When we turned onto Highland Drive, I saw the flashing lights first, red and blue strobing against the craftsman houses, turning my familiar neighborhood into something alien and terrifying. Then I saw what was left of my house. Nothing. Just a pile of smoking rubble where my little two-story home had stood for nearly a century. Jesus Christ, the cab driver whispered. I paid him with trembling hands and stumbled toward the chaos. Firefighters moved through the scene like ants, their hoses still trained on the last stubborn flames. Neighbors stood in clusters on the sidewalk, some still in bathrobes, all staring at the destruction with the same shocked expression I probably wore. Mr. Miller. A tall man in a fire chief's helmet approached me. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes grim. I'm Captain Ramirez. I'm sorry about your home. What happened? My voice came out as a croak. Gas leak. Massive explosion around 2:45 a.m. The whole structure came down in minutes. He studied my face carefully. You're lucky you weren't inside. We found no signs of anyone in the debris, but we had to be sure. Ellen Thompson appeared at my elbow, her gray hair wild, her face pale with shock. Philip. When I heard the explosion, I was terrified you had come home early from your trip. I kept telling the firefighters you said you'd be away, but I wasn't completely sure. Her voice trailed off as she looked at the ruins. I heard it from 4 houses down. It shook my whole place. I stared at the smoking ruins, trying to process what I was seeing. My bedroom had been on the 2nd floor, right above where the kitchen used to be. My bed, my clothes, the photo albums Laura hadn't wanted in the divorce. All of it gone. The gas line, I managed to say. How does something like that just happen? Captain Ramirez's expression darkened. That's what we're trying to figure out. The explosion was centered near your basement. We'll know more after the investigation, but... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say we're treating this as more than an accident. Ellen clutched my arm. What does that mean if I had been in my bedroom when that explosion happened? I would be dead right now. The thought hit me like ice water. Grace had known. Somehow that homeless woman sitting on a street corner had known my house was going to explode. But gas leaks don't just decide to kill someone at 2:45 in the morning. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of my home, I knew I had to find Grace. The firefighters were still hosing down the last embers, but there was nothing left to save. Captain Ramirez had told me to go get some rest, but where was home now? My bookstore felt like another lifetime, and the thought of sitting alone with my racing thoughts made my skin crawl. Grace. She had answers I needed. I walked the familiar route back to First and Madison, my clothes still reeking of smoke, my hands still shaking from what I had witnessed. The morning commuters were starting to appear. Early risers heading to the ferry. Joggers with coffee cups. The rhythm of Seattle waking up to another Tuesday. None of them knew that someone had just tried to murder me. She was waiting for me at her usual corner, as if she knew I would come looking for answers. Grace. I stopped in front of her, suddenly not sure what to say. How do you thank someone for saving your life? She looked up at me with those pale blue eyes, and I could see she hadn't slept either. There were new lines of exhaustion around her eyes, tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday morning. You listened, she said quietly. Thank God you listened. How did you know? The words tumbled out of me. How could you possibly have known my house was going to explode? Grace reached into the worn canvas bag beside her and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind they stopped making 15 years ago. Her fingers, steadier than mine, navigated to the photo gallery. I saw everything last night, she said, holding the phone out to me. The image quality was poor, grainy, taken in near darkness, but I could make out the shape of my house, the basement entrance on the side. And there, crouched near the gas meter with some kind of equipment in his hands, was a figure I recognized instantly. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't finish the sentence. Your son, Grace said gently. He came around 11:40, had tools, some kind of device, worked down there for maybe 25 minutes. I stared at the phone screen, willing the image to change, to become someone else, anyone else. But there was no mistaking that profile. Those shoulders, the way he held his head when he was concentrating. Benjamin. 2 weeks ago, the memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks ago, Benjamin had come to the bookstore. I had been surprised to see him. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce, since Laura had poisoned him against me with her version of events. He had looked terrible, thin and jittery, his eyes bloodshot in a way that had nothing to do with crying. "Dad," he had said, fidgeting with the sleeves of his jacket. I was wondering, do you still have that life insurance policy? The big one I had been sorting inventory, not really paying attention. What kind of question is that? Ben, just curious. I mean, after the divorce and everything, you're still covered. Right, for like a lot, his eyes had been darting around the store, never quite meeting mine. At the time, I had chalked it up to his addiction, the way drugs made people nervous and paranoid. I had told him yes. I still had the policy. $800,000. Laura had insisted on it during the good years. Back when we were planning a future. "That's good," he had said. And there had been something in his voice, something that should have set off every alarm bell. "That's really good, Dad." Now it all made horrifying sense. My son had been planning to kill me for the insurance money. But I needed the police to see this evidence before I could fully accept that my own child wanted me dead. Walking into the Seattle Police Department's West Precinct with photos of my son tampering with my gas meter felt like the worst nightmare I could never wake from. The desk sergeant directed me to Detective Mark Sullivan's office on the second floor. I climbed the stairs with lead feet. Grace's old flip phone clutched in my sweating palm. "How do you tell a stranger that your own flesh and blood tried to murder you?" Detective Sullivan looked at the photos with the grim expression of a man who had seen too many family betrayals. "Jesus," he muttered, studying the grainy image of Benjamin crouched by my gas meter. "How long has your son been using? A few years? Maybe longer." The words tasted like ash. I stopped keeping track after the divorce. Detective Sullivan was a solid man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen every kind of darkness Seattle could offer. But something about my case made him lean forward with sharp interest. "The explosion happened around 2:45 a.m., he said, making notes. "This photo shows him there around 11:40 p.m. That's a 3-hour window to set up a delayed ignition device." He looked up at me. "Mr. Miller, I have to ask, do you have any idea why your son would want to hurt you?" I told him about the insurance policy. $800,000. Benjamin's strange questions 2 weeks ago. The way his eyes had lit up when I confirmed the amount. "We'll need to move fast," Sullivan said, reaching for his radio. "If he's desperate enough to try this once, he might run or try again." The raid on Benjamin's apartment in Capitol Hill happened less than 2 hours later. I wasn't there. Sullivan thought it would be too traumatic. But he called me afterward with the details. They had found more gas line equipment in Benjamin's closet, along with printouts about delayed ignition devices downloaded from the dark corners of the internet. Benjamin hadn't resisted arrest. According to Sullivan, he just sat on his mattress and started crying the moment they kicked the door in. They brought him to the station in handcuffs. Through the one-way glass, I watched my 30-year-old son shuffle into the interrogation room, looking like a scarecrow, clothes hanging off his thin frame, hair greasy and unkempt, hands shaking with withdrawal tremors. "I'm sorry, Dad," were the first words out of his mouth when Sullivan started the recording. "I'm so sorry." "Why?" Benjamin Sullivan asked gently. "Why did you want to hurt your father?" "The money," Benjamin whispered. "I needed the money. I owe people, really bad people. They were going to kill me if I didn't pay them back. So you decided to kill your father for his life insurance. Benjamin nodded miserably. $800,000. It would have solved everything. Hearing my son confess to attempted murder broke something deep inside me. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. This was the little boy I had taught to ride a bike on Alki Beach. The teenager I had helped with algebra homework. The young man I had hoped would one day take over the bookstore. But something in Benjamin's confession didn't add up. He kept mentioning things that made no sense. She said you deserved it, he mumbled during a pause in questioning. She said you threw her away like garbage, that you never really loved us. Detective Sullivan glanced at the one-way mirror. Who said that? Benjamin, who told you your father deserved to die. Benjamin's eyes went wide like he realized he had said too much. Nobody. I meant nobody. But I knew better. Someone had been whispering poison in my son's ear for years. 3 weeks of sleepless nights passed before I found the courage to face Benjamin in person. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grainy photo of him crouched by my gas meter. Every morning, I woke up in the small studio apartment I had rented above a cafe in Queen Anne, wondering how my life had become this nightmare. My house was gone. My son was in jail for trying to murder me. And somewhere out there, someone had convinced my boy that I deserved to die. The correctional facility north of Everett looked exactly like the concrete hell I had imagined. All razor wire and gray sky. The security process took forever. Metal detectors, pat-downs, paperwork, more metal detectors. The guard walking me through the corridors said Benjamin had been asking about me every single day, saying he needed to tell me something important. How is he detoxing, I asked. It's been rough, but he's through the worst of it physically. The guard replied, mentally you'll see for yourself. The visiting room was exactly what you would expect from a place designed to crush hope. Buzzing fluorescent lights, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, thick bulletproof glass with phones on either side. I sat down in chair number 8 and waited. When they brought Benjamin in, I barely recognized him. 3 weeks of forced sobriety had revealed just how much damage the drugs had done. His cheekbones jutted out sharply. His prison jumpsuit hung loose on his skeletal frame, and his eyes looked like they belonged to a man twice his age. He sat down across from me and picked up the phone with shaking hands. Dad, he whispered and immediately started crying. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear to God I never wanted to hurt you. But Mom said. He stopped himself, glancing around the visiting room like he expected someone to be listening. Tell me about Mom. Benjamin, I said, leaning forward and pressing my palm against the glass. What exactly did she say? Benjamin looked around nervously, then leaned closer to the glass. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Dad, she might be listening. That's when Benjamin finally broke down and told me everything Laura had done. She visits me every week, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. She made me believe you were the enemy. I pressed closer to the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs. After 3 weeks of wondering why my son had wanted me dead, I was finally going to get real answers. What did she tell you? Ben, that you threw her out for money, that you never loved us. His voice cracked. She said you only cared about your precious bookstore and your books, never about your family. The words hit me like punches. Laura had always been good at twisting the truth, but this was something far darker. She said the affair was your fault, Benjamin continued, wiping his nose with his sleeve, that you drove her to it because you were cold and selfish. She made me believe everything wrong in our family was because of you. Benjamin, that's not... I know, he shouted, then caught himself and lowered his voice. I know that now. Dad, but when you're using, when you're desperate, you believe whatever gets you through the day. and she knew exactly what to say. "Tell me about the plan," I said quietly. Benjamin's hands were shaking as he held the phone. She brought me the equipment, some kind of delayed ignition device she bought online. She knew exactly how to set it up, where to place it for maximum damage. She planned every detail. She even picked the timing, said 2:45 a.m. would be when you'd be in the deepest sleep. She promised to split the insurance money 50-50. He couldn't finish the sentence. $800,000. I said. She said it would solve everything. My debts, her financial problems from the divorce. She made it sound like we deserved that money, like you owed it to us for all the pain you had caused. I stared at my son through the bulletproof glass, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not the drug addict who tried to kill me, but the confused, manipulated young man who had been poisoned against his own father. Dad. I think Mom planned this from the very beginning of the divorce. All those things she said about you being greedy, about you stealing her life away. I think she was already setting me up to hate you. The pieces were falling into place now. Laura's sudden interest in Benjamin during the divorce proceedings, the way she had painted me as the villain in every conversation, her insistence that I keep the life insurance policy even after we split up. She had played the longest, cruelest game. Detective Mark Sullivan set up the perfect trap for Laura's next prison visit. Hidden cameras rolled as I crouched behind the one-way mirror, waiting to see the woman who had manipulated our son into becoming a killer. My hands were sweating, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the microphones would pick it up. After everything Benjamin had told me, I thought I was prepared for this moment. I wasn't. Sullivan had positioned himself just outside the visiting room with 3 other officers, ready to move in the second we had enough. Benjamin sat at the same plastic table where he had confessed everything to me 4 days earlier, looking nervous but determined to see this through. At exactly 2 o'clock, Laura walked in. I hadn't seen my ex-wife since the divorce was finalized, and she looked different, thinner, harder somehow. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she wore the kind of expensive coat that screamed, "I'm doing just fine without you." But there was something in her eyes, a coldness I had never noticed during our 18-year marriage. She sat down across from Benjamin and picked up the phone. "You idiot," were the first words out of her mouth. No hello. No how are you holding up. Just immediate venom. I told you to keep quiet about the plan no matter what. Benjamin played his part perfectly, looking confused and hurt. "Mom, I don't understand. They had evidence. They had photos. I don't care what they had." Laura's voice rose, and I could see the guard glancing over with interest. "You were supposed to keep your mouth shut no matter what. That was the deal. But Mom, they knew. Your father deserved to die for what he did to me in that divorce." The hatred in her voice made my blood run cold. He took everything from me. The house, the money, my reputation. He destroyed my life. Benjamin leaned back, genuinely shocked by her intensity. "Mom, you said it was about the insurance money. It was about justice." Laura slammed her palm against the glass. "I spent months manipulating you, feeding you exactly what you needed to hear, and you ruined everything." I watched through the one-way mirror as my ex-wife revealed herself to be someone I had never truly known. This wasn't the woman I had been married to for 18 years. This was a stranger wearing her face. The plan was perfect. She continued, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Gas leak. Accidental explosion. Grieving son inherits daddy's life insurance. We split the money and disappear. Simple. But that homeless woman, how was I supposed to know some crazy bag lady was watching the house? Laura's composure was completely gone now. "You should have checked for witnesses. The plan was perfect until you got weak and confessed." That's when Detective Sullivan burst through the door. Laura Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of murder. 9 months after Laura's arrest, I stood in my new bookstore watching Grace arrange books on the shelf with the same quiet care she once showed sitting on cold concrete. Some stories have endings you never see coming. Mine turned a homeless woman into family and gave a broken father a second chance at everything. The new Miller's books was smaller than the original, tucked into a cozy storefront in Ballard with warm lighting, comfortable reading chairs, and the smell of fresh coffee always in the air. Insurance money from the house had covered most of the startup costs, and I had used some of my savings to make it exactly what I had always dreamed of. Grace moved slowly but deliberately, organizing the mystery section with the same patience she had shown on that street corner for years. Her gray hair was clean and neatly styled now, and she wore a simple blue cardigan that brought out her eyes. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck me most was how she carried herself with the dignity she had never lost, even when she had nothing. Nora Roberts should go in chronological order, she said, not looking up from her work. Whatever you think is best. I smiled, watching her handle each book like it was precious. You're the expert. 9 months ago, Grace had been sleeping in doorways and hoping for spare change. Today, she lived in a small but comfortable apartment 3 blocks away and worked part-time at the Seattle Public Library. The transition hadn't been easy. Decades of homelessness don't disappear overnight. But she was rebuilding her life one day at a time. Letter from Benjamin came today, I said, pulling the envelope from my jacket pocket. Grace's face lit up. She had never met my son, but she followed his progress like a proud grandmother. How is he doing? 180 days clean. He's in a good program, learning cabinetry. Says he wants to help rebuild the bookstore when he gets out. And more, Grace said quietly. The road to forgiveness had been long and painful. For months, I had wrestled with anger at Benjamin for trying to kill me, at Laura for manipulating him, at myself for missing every sign. But watching my son fight his addiction and take responsibility had slowly melted the ice around my heart. Laura's trial had been swift and brutal, 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder, with no possibility of parole for the first 12. The recordings from the prison visit had made her guilt undeniable. She had shown no remorse, even during sentencing, claiming she had been the real victim in our marriage. I felt sorry for her in a strange way. She had destroyed her own life pursuing revenge for wrongs that existed only in her mind. You know what I realized, I said, settling into one of the reading chairs. You didn't just save my life that morning, Grace. You saved my soul, too. Grace paused, holding a worn copy of an Agatha Christie novel. How do you figure if I had died in that explosion? Benjamin would have spent the rest of his life believing he had killed a father who deserved it. Laura would have gotten away with murder. And you, I gestured around the bookstore, you would still be sitting on that corner. Maybe, Grace said, placing the book in its proper spot. Or maybe something else would have happened. Life has a way of working things out. She was right. Of course. I had learned that kindness always comes back. Just not always when or how you expect it. I had given Grace a few dollars every morning without expecting anything in return. And she had saved my life. Now I was trying to give her a new start. And in return, she was helping me build something better than what I had lost. You know what the funny thing is, Grace said, sliding the last book into place. I used to be a librarian 40 years ago, before everything fell apart. I never thought I would touch books again. I looked around at the shelves, at the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, at this woman who had become the family I thought I had lost forever. And sometimes the people with the least give the most. Looking back at everything that happened, I realize how blind I was to the poison growing in my own family. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the warning signs when someone you love starts asking strange questions about money or insurance. Trust your instincts. And more importantly, trust the people who show you unexpected kindness. God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes he sends help through the most unlikely messengers. Grace had nothing to give except a warning that saved my life. She reminded me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or insurance policies, but in the connections we make with other human beings. I've learned that the best grandpa stories aren't just about survival. They're about redemption. This true story taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing love over revenge. Benjamin is rebuilding his life one day at a time with God's grace guiding him through recovery. When Laura chose manipulation and murder, she lost everything. When Grace chose compassion despite having nothing, she gained a family. God has a way of turning our worst circumstances into our greatest blessings. Sometimes the people we least expect become the family we most need. That's what makes the best grandpa stories. They show us that love always finds a way in the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear about hope and second chances. Leave a comment below about a time when a stranger's kindness changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories that remind us why love always wins.